Welcome to AFrame Lesson 3.3. In this video, we're going to see how we can take what we've learned in the previous two videos of 3.1 and 3.2 and encapsulate it as part of a class. To kind of really feel the power of, why do we want to create classes? We're not going to create an array of objects from these classes and then interact with them. So let's get to it. So I think it merits a little bit to review what we did in the previous video. So we saw that through the use of an event listener, we were able to add a flag to our component, which then we can use as part of the if statement to decide whether an object should be rotating or not. Or again, more in general about animation. So we can see here that when we enter the box, the my box gets a rotate value of true, which means now this if statement works, which means it rotates. Now when I take my mouse off of it, that's this event listener, which means it set the rotate variable of the my box to false. And again, these are dynamically added. A AFrame component of a box doesn't have a rotate variable property to it. We've dynamically added. So that's key to understand in this particular example. So now what we want to do is we want to take that same thing and just encapsulate it as part of a class. So let's start by simply looking at what we have here. So we've created a class that accepts an XZ coordinate. They all get positioned at a value of 1 in terms of the vertical. There's an R of 0, a DR of 1, and then we see that same kind of functionality down here of increasing the R by some dr and then changing that rotation to that particular value of R. So this is where our class is. The next thing I want to show you is how do we get all these boxes on here? So we've created an array that we're going to populate. So this array is called boxes. It's going to have all the boxes. And through the use of two for loops that I'm using to control the X and Z coordinates, so we get a nice little even pattern for all these boxes. I create a new box. I push that box onto the array. Then I use a recursive loop to animate the boxes. And how do I do that? Well, I use this for each loop that goes through each box that's inside of this array of boxes, and then it calls the update function. Again, what does the update function do? Well, the update function is the one that's handling the rotation. So again, that's the reason, and it might look a little more impressive over here. That's the reason all these boxes, as we look around, are rotating. But what we want to do in this world is control that rotation. We don't want the boxes to rotate until we actually put our cursor over it. And this is where we're going to start adding things in. Now to start off, what I want to do is I want to introduce that concept of a flag to our rotation. So we're going to set this dot rotate to false, which means that if I add this if statement down here with the word this dot rotate, again, this looks a little bit different than in the previous video, and that's because we're working inside of a class. So you really got to switch gears in terms of how you're thinking about some of these variables, because now we're inside of a class. So this dot rotate is set to false, which means that if I were to run this again, none of the boxes are rotating. So now it's our job to interact with a box and then set that this dot rotate to true, just like we did in the previous example. So let's add our event listener, and we're going to add it to the component, which is represented in this variable of this dot object. So let's add event listener. Oops, not. Take the period off. Do it again. There we go. And we use the mouse enter. And it needs a callback function. And just as review, let's see what this callback function returns for the word this. Now, up until now, you will have noticed that we made the analogy that the word this referred to the component. All right? So let's just verify that that's still happening. So put our mouse over one, and you can see here it is still referring to the component. The challenge that we have though is that the this dot rotate, excuse me, is in the class, not in the component. So we're going to need to use a slightly different function called the arrow function. And again, I'm just changing the way we've created the function. I'm going to put this as a comment if you want to further investigate how an arrow function works. But I want you to see what we get back now with the word this. So remember, before we actually got the component. Now, notice we're getting the class because we're getting all the class variables in addition to that rotate variable of false. So using this arrow function, the word this now does refer to the class. So we're going to use this instead of the more traditional callback function with the word function in it. Because now what we can do is we could do this dot rotate is equal to true. And let's see how that pans out in our world. All right, so as we go through, okay. So you can see here the boxes, and actually let me take it over here, it might be more impressive on a bigger screen. So as I go over a particular box, that box starts to rotate. But also notice that the box continues to rotate. Well, you know what? We know how to solve that already because we handled that over in 3.2. The only difference is that we have to change the way we create our callback function. So let's add that to our world. And let's do a mouse leave. And now, when we put our mouse over it, oops, copy and paste mistake. Let's set that equal to false. Let's try it again. So when I put my mouse over the particular box, it rotates, but then when I take my mouse off of it, it doesn't. I should probably just keep going back to this one. And let's just pick some of these other boxes. So this one's rotating. I'm going to take my mouse off of it, or the cursor off of it. It stops rotating, but then the next one rotates. So we definitely have a lot more control as to which elements that we dynamically created in our world through the use of classes animate. Now I want to add a little bit more to this. So let's also do a this dot. Remember, this now refers to the object, to the class, which means I could do a this dot object, set attribute, and let's just simply change the color, which I believe that's what we did in lesson 3.1. So let's change it to yellow when we put our mouse over it, and then let's change it back to white when we take our mouse off of it. And at this point, I'm going straight to this version. All right, so we're going to put our mouse over, and this is definitely a lot nicer. Again, changing the color definitely brings the focus to the particular object. And we can see here that when we take our mouse off of it, it goes back to white and it stops rotating. So let's just bring this up a little bit more. All right, so this is pretty much it. This is how you encapsulate this whole idea of controlling animations in a class. Let's go back to our presentation. So in this video, we saw how we can add event listeners to classes, and then through the use of flags that became class variables, we were able to control the animation of that particular instance of the class. We created an array of objects, and we saw how by using classes, we could really produce a lot of things, each with their own interaction, because we encapsulated the interaction in the class. So hopefully you have big visions as to how to make things interact in your world, and enjoy.